Welcome to Mystery Bedtime Stories channel. Take a moment to get comfortable. Whether you're here to drift gently into sleep or simply to rest your thoughts with something calm and distant, you've arrived at the right time and the right place. Tonight, we journey into the quiet corridors of myth, where gods were both protectors and punishers, where the line between victim and monster was often blurred, and where silence was not peace, but power. Our story centers on Medusa, not the wide-eyed monster staring out from old pottery, but the woman beneath the legend, the girl in the temple, the figure behind the fear. This will not be a tale of heroes and beasts, not in the usual sense. Instead, we'll explore the stillness before the curse, the slow path of Perseus, the shifting shape of Medusa in art and meaning, and the curious way she came to represent both terror and protection in the minds of ancient elites. As always, we move slowly here. There's no need to follow every thread or hold on to every name. If your mind wanders, that's perfectly fine. The story will be here, flowing like the olive-scented breeze through old marble columns. So close your eyes or soften your gaze, and let's begin at a time before Medusa was a monster. Daily life as a maiden in Athena's temple. Imagine yourself waking just before dawn in an ancient marble sanctuary. The sky outside still holds on to night, but the faintest blush of sunrise spills across the horizon like diluted wine. You rise not from a bed, but from a narrow stone bench covered with woven linen. It's cool against your skin. The air is dry and smells faintly of olive oil, beeswax, and crushed herbs. You are a young maiden, chosen perhaps offerer to serve in the sacred temple of Athena. To the people outside these walls, this is a noble path. A life of divine proximity. A life without marriage, without the complications of family, without choice. The rhythm of your days is constant and silent. Your first task each morning is to rekindle the sacred flame. You pad barefoot across the flagstones, carefully keeping your eyes low. Not in shame, but in reverence. Silence is expected. Words are reserved for prayer and ritual. The fire is sheltered in a bronze brazier shaped like a lion's mouth. You crouch and feed it new wood, watching as the embers awaken. The warmth is a comfort, even here in the sun-soaked lands of Greece. It reminds you of something human, something flickering and unpredictable, like the stories that swirl through the city outside the temple walls. By mid-morning, you prepare the offerings, clean cloth, bowls of barley, small cups of honeyed wine, and fresh-cut branches of olive. Everything must be placed just so. Athena is not a goddess of indulgence. She is order, logic, wisdom. Precision is sacred. You're not alone here. There are other maidens, some older, some younger. Conversations are brief, whispers behind pillars. Occasionally, a priest walks by in quiet authority, checking your posture, the angle of your hands as you sweep the floor. The temple is not cruel, but it is not gentle either. It does not need to be. It exists in service to something greater. As the sun reaches its peak, you attend the midday prayers. The chamber echoes with chanting soft and rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Outside, the world goes about its business. Inside, the divine watches, but things are changing. Whispers have crept into the stone halls like vines. There are rumors. A glance too long from a passing priest. A conversation behind the inner sanctum doors. And then the story begins. You do not see the goddess. No one ever really does. But when the punishment comes, it is final. No trial, no pleading. One day, the temple's routines pause just for a moment, and you are no longer seen as sacred. You are seen as cursed. The myth says she was transformed. Her hair turned to serpents, her face made deadly, her beauty weaponized by the goddess who once claimed her. But before all of that, before the legend, there was simply this. A girl in a temple, lighting fires, keeping silence. Living within marble walls that would not protect her, Medusa, before she became myth, lived a life shaped by duty and silence. And now, with the faint scent of olive leaves still lingering in the air, we step into the next part of her story, a journey not of her own choosing. Chapter 2: Perseus' slow and fated mission to slay Medusa. Let us shift now from the quiet stone corridors of Athena's temple to a very different kind of stillness, one that stretches across the Aegean Sea over windswept islands, and toward the shore of a small kingdom where a young man, Perseus, lived unaware that his name would one day be etched into legend. But our tale tonight does not race with heroism. It meanders, slowly like the tides themselves. This is not the Perseus of triumphant sculpture or swift justice. This is the quieter version, the uncertain youth, the reluctant instrument of fate. Perseus was born to a strange destiny. His mother, Danae, had been locked away by her father, a king fearful of a prophecy that said her son would one day be his end. But the gods, as they often do in these old stories, ignored the will of men. And so Perseus was born, cradled in secrecy, raised far from royal halls. As he grew, Perseus lived simply. Island life was humble. Fish nets, salted air, the call of gulls, these shaped his early world far more than swordplay or ambition. But when he came of age, the old world stirred. It began, as many myths do, with a boast and a bargain. Polydex, a local king, announced he would marry. As was custom, all men were to bring gifts. Perseus had little to offer. When mocked for this, he made a fateful vow. He would bring the king the head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned flesh to stone. It was not bravado, not truly. It was more a defense, a desperate bluff. But the words had been spoken, and so the gods began to whisper. The path to Medusa's lair was not one of straight lines or sudden action. It was a path of guidance, gifts, and slow revelation. The gods did not abandon Perseus. Hermes gave him a blade, sharp enough to cut through the impossible. Athena, curiously, provided a mirrored shield, not for attack, but for caution. Never look directly, she warned. Let reflection guide your hand. But it was not enough. Perseus still needed to find the Gorgon's lair, hidden far beyond the edges of known land. To find it, he had to seek the Gree, 3 old sisters who shared a single eye and a single tooth. They were not kind, nor easily persuaded. Their world was one of fog and riddles, of craggy coastlines and whispering winds. Imagine yourself here watching as Perseus approaches the sisters. He does not threaten them. He waits, watches. And finally, when the eyes pass from one gnarled hand to another, he takes it, just for a moment, long enough to strike a bargain. In exchange for their vision, the Gree give him what he needs, directions, and something else. A satchel that can hold a head without danger. Winged sandals to move without touching the ground. A cap of darkness to vanish when needed. Even now, Medusa sleeps. She is not stalking prey or haunting the world. She lies hidden with her sisters far to the west. Their home is not fiery or grotesque. It is quiet, isolated, surrounded by stone figures, animals, men, birds, all frozen mid-movement, like memories too strong to let go. When Perseus finally arrives, he does not charge in. There is no cry of battle. There is breath, stillness, and the careful turning of a mirrored shield. The moment of the strike, if it happened quickly, felt stretched in the memory of time. The blade was sharp, the gaze was never met. And when it was done, there was no cry from the other Gorgons. Only the still wind. Only the beginning of silence. Perseus left, holding the head not with triumph, but with caution. It was a weapon, now one he used sparingly, with purpose. Even Athena took it eventually, affixing it to her shield like a final irony. But in that soft retelling, the myth becomes quieter, less a tale of conquest and more a story of inheritance, of how one young man walked a path chosen for him, guided by gods and by fear, and how a once-living woman became an eternal emblem. We move now not away from the myth, but deeper into it. Past the events, into their echoes, into how Medusa's image changed through time. Not her face, but her meaning. Chapter 3. The Gorgon in Art, Myth, Feminism, and Changing Cultural Meaning. So now the story has been told. Medusa, once a mortal maiden, cursed and cast out, slain by a man guided by gods. Her severed head, used first as a weapon, then worn as a symbol. A face turned into a warning. A myth etched into marble and bronze. But myths do not rest when the telling ends. They continue. They shift. They change. Let us now slow our steps and observe, through the long corridor of centuries, how Medusa transformed again and again. From monster to metaphor, in the earliest Greek art, the Gorgon was not beautiful. She was monstrous from the beginning, grotesque, wide-eyed, with a gaping mouth and serpent-like features. Often she is shown front-facing, an unusual choice in ancient art, eyes locked directly with the viewer, teeth bared. Tongue out. To see her was to be stopped, to be stilled. That was the point, but gradually something changed. Artists began to soften her. The snarling face remained, but the lines grew more elegant. In time, Medusa's features became almost mournful, almost human. Her serpents were no longer a chaotic tangle, but were rendered with grace, symmetry, and poise. In Roman mosaics, she adorned the center of floors, not as a threat, but as a guardian. Her gaze was meant to ward off evil, to keep the household safe. Protection through fear, power through transformation. Centuries passed. As Christian Europe rose, Medusa faded but never vanished. She lingered on the edges, in stories and carved corners. And then, in the Renaissance, she returned. Not as a warning, but as a subject. Painters like Caravaggio reimagined her, this time with emotional clarity. His Medusa does not roar, she stares. Caught in the moment of death. Blood trails down her neck, but her eyes are alive with terror. Not monstrous rage, but panic. Awareness, recognition. In his depiction, she becomes a victim, one whose punishment has outlived her crime, if ever there was one. And then came the poets and the scholars. By the 19th century, as myth was no longer scripture but literature, writers began to ask a quieter question. What if Medusa was never the monster at all? Feminist interpretations emerged, gently, then with strength. They noted that Medusa was punished not for violence, but for violation. That her transformation was not empowerment, but silencing. That her monstrous form was a warning not to her enemies, but to others like her. And yet her image endured. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Medusa was adopted again, this time as an emblem of female rage, autonomy, and resistance. Not a monster, but a mirror. Not a villain, but a victim redefined. She appeared on book covers and sculpture and protest art, a head held high, snakes alive, eyes unflinching. And still, even with all this, the legend does not settle. She is not wholly tragic, not wholly wrathful. She is both. She is complicated, as many enduring myths are. Perhaps that is why we still speak of her, not as a creature of nightmares, but as a figure of quiet complexity. As you rest now, picture her not on a battlefield, but carved softly into the center of a forgotten fountain. The water still flows gently around her face, not in fear, but in memory. Her eyes closed now, the snake sleeping. The stone cool. She has become something else entirely. A myth slowly changing in the hands of time. And now we move to the final part of our journey. Beyond the myth and its meanings, we look at how Medusa was used, how her image adorned armor, temples, and palaces. Not to terrify, but to protect and to rule. Let's continue. Chapter 4. Why ancient Greek elites used Medusa as a political and military symbol. And so, Medusa, once a girl, then a curse, then a myth took on yet another form. In this final movement of her long and winding tale, we no longer find her in temples or wild shores. We find her engraved into the shields of soldiers, carved above city gates, cast into coins, and painted into palatial halls. Her image, now frozen, weaponized, and wielded by those who ruled. The face that once stopped the heart now served to stop the enemy. Imagine for a moment a polished bronze shield. Not just any shield, but one worn by an elite hoplite, perhaps marching in formation through the dusty streets of Athens. Upon its curved surface, where a family crest or geometric design might rest, there instead gleams the unmistakable face of Medusa, mouth open. Eyes unblinking, hair coiled into venomous motion. This was no accident, this was intention. The Greeks believed in apotropaic magic symbols designed not to attract, but to repel, to ward off evil, to protect. And Medusa, with her petrifying gaze and infamous fate, became one of the most powerful such symbols. Her image, paradoxically, was meant to protect not the innocent necessarily, but the powerful, the city, the soldier, the legacy. Temples, too, bore her face. Above the entrance to the archaic temple of Artemis at Corfu, a massive stone carving of Medusa stood watch. Her arms splayed, her expression fierce, flanked by lions. It was not meant to tell her story. It was meant to stop you in your tracks, to remind you that within these walls, divine forces stirred. Forces beyond mercy or debate. Coins minted by cities and kingdoms sometimes bore her face. As well, her features simplified into harsh lines and spirals. Her gaze confronting anyone who dared spend or hoard the currency. It was a subtle claim. This city is protected. This ruler commands fear and favor. Even the Romans, centuries later, inherited this symbolic use. They placed Medusa on breastplates, including the famous aegis worn by depictions of Athena herself. A reminder that wisdom and war were intertwined. That even the goddess of logic needed the face of fear to guard her. And here, in this final transformation, Medusa becomes something altogether strange. She is no longer a person, no longer even a myth. She is an emblem, a sigil, a silent guardian for those who already hold power. The tragedy of her story fades into abstraction. What began as punishment, then evolved into legend, is now just design. But perhaps there is still something haunting in that final form, the way her story was hollowed and repurposed, the way her pain became someone else's shield, and yet the image endures. Even today, you can find her face on fashion runways, luxury brands, even on modern architecture stripped of meaning and yet not quite meaningless. She remains. She endures, not just as a myth, but as a memory we haven't finished interpreting. And now we leave her there, quiet once again, her eyes closed, her story told. As you return to the stillness of your own space, let the echoes of Medusa's story drift quietly in the background. A tale not of monsters and heroes, but of transformation, silence, and the strange power of memory. She was once a maiden, then a monster, then a metaphor. Her gaze no longer turns you to stone, but invites you to reflect. And here, in this calm and quiet space, the past settles gently around you like dust on old marble, like sleep pulling you gently toward dreams. Thank you for joining us tonight on Mystery Bedtime Stories. May your rest be peaceful and your dream undisturbed. Good night.